A burning question for much of my life has been, what does it mean to be a full, free human being? How could I make the best use of this life? And how could I help others? What does it mean to really help others and have impact? When I was 21 years old, I took a one-year leave of absence from Rutgers University, and that 1 year turned into 10 years at the San Francisco Zen Center. My parents were not thrilled about this. And my 10th year, I was the director of a place that I imagine many of you have heard of, and many of you may have been to, a place called Tassajara Zen Mountain Center, which is a monastery in the winter, and it turns into a resort in the summertime. And my 10th year, I was director. And I was very surprised to wake up one morning and realize that though I thought of myself as a Zen student, that I was running a business. Tassajara had $1 million budget. I was responsible for about 60 people. And not only was I running a business, but I had this really huge epiphany that why aren't all companies bringing in these contemplative practices? It's working so well here, and it seems to it just made so much sense. So I decided to go from there to business school. I got my MBA degree. I started a few different companies. I did some consulting work, found myself working inside of Google, and then met Google's jolly good fellow, Meng, and he and I created the Search Inside Yourself program within Google, which became immensely popular. So I've been asked to talk about what are the foundations for success in bringing mindfulness into the world of work. I want to start with a story, and this was from several years ago, in which I was hired to facilitate a meeting of about 16 CEOs of for-profit and non-profit companies. They were all on a board together. And it was a 3-day retreat, and I was supposed to do a small session right in the middle, like after a day and a half of this retreat. I walked into the session, and as I was walking in, someone pulled me aside and said, this retreat is not going very well. We just fired the last facilitator. Welcome. So I thought, well, what am I going to do in this situation? And I thought, well, I'll start with doing what I know how to do best. I said, let's sit. And actually, I could see about a third of the room was thrilled with that idea, a third was okay, and the other third were some men in the back who were kind of not having it. But we sat for a while. And then I got them into small groups. I got them into groups of 4s. And I said, I want each person to speak to these 3 questions. Why are you here on the planet? How's it going? And what actions might you take in response to these first 2 questions? And I was actually surprised how deeply they entered these questions. And there was actually tears, and people were totally into it. I got them all back, 16 people back in the room, and immediately someone raised their hand and said, this was what was missing from this retreat. What was missing was, first, we didn't stop. We didn't just have that time to create space. We didn't connect, and we didn't connect at a heart level because we had so much to do. We had such a big, full agenda. We didn't think we had time for any of this. And now we know we'll get a lot more done now that we've done those things, and before it was all frustrating. So I think there's a really important through line there. And there's also an interesting paradox, right? So for myself, coming from the contemplative tradition, the contemplative tradition is essentially about non-attainment. And work is essentially about attainment. So it's kind of interesting that we're having this conference about mindfulness and work. And sometimes I actually think of it as, how can we bring non-attainment into the realm of attainment? And what use does this sense of letting go, this kind of radical sense of non-judgmentalness, which people talked about, and yet keeping discernment? And I was also really looking at this through line between between self-mastery, self-awareness, effective leadership, and getting more of the right things done, not just getting more done in a way that was compassionate and also that served the greater good. So as Jim mentioned, I'm one of the founders, and I'm the current CEO of the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. And we actually don't say often that we don't describe ourselves as being primarily a mindfulness program. I like to describe what we do as leadership, that we are a leadership program that uses the tools of mindfulness and emotional intelligence, and that we're based in neuroscience. And all of what we do could be described in these two slides. It's about taking people from this to this. And this is what, and not that we're always like this, but we all know this. We all know this. This is part of life today. And this is about freedom. This is about the emotional Jedi, the person who can meet each situation fully, which I actually like as a kind of a definition for what mindfulness is. How can we meet each situation? And the work we do is framed around emotional intelligence, and we use Daniel Goleman's framework, and we talk about these 5 different competencies. And we describe each of these, self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills, as skills and competencies that you could build, but that require attention training, that require the ability to be able to focus your attention and open your attention, the ability to have a heartfelt, compassionate approach to the world as the support for building these competencies. And we talk about the benefits of emotional intelligence as being stellar performance, as being outstanding leadership, and as about being happiness. And it's also important to us that we use this framework of emotional intelligence, and we make the connection between mindfulness and self-awareness. We know through thousands of years that mindfulness is trainable. We know this. Even before science proved it, we know this. We know that mindfulness looks a lot like self-awareness. If you look at the definitions on what they are, they're a lot alike. And we know that therefore, we know that self-awareness must be trainable, since they're a lot alike. And we know that self-awareness is the foundation of emotional intelligence, and emotional intelligence is a trainable skill. So this question, what does success look like? What does it mean to create a workplace where people can thrive? One of the big questions that we're asking, is success about training massive amounts of people to become active practitioners? One of the discussions we had just the other day was saying that maybe our goal should be to train 1 billion people to become active practitioners. But what is an active practitioner? We're still kind of dealing with what that means. It's hard. It's actually hard to define. Or is success about depth? Do we want to have longer, in-depth programs and really go deeply? And actually what we've come down to is that we really want to do both. We want to make these teachings massively available, partly because you never know what will impact someone's life. Sometimes a short talk will touch someone and change their life. Sometimes a year-long program might not have that much impact. So we're really looking at this question of what does success mean? And we feel like we've had a lot of successes as we've trained thousands of people at Google. Peter will tell you about the work we're doing at SAP. We're also working in healthcare and nonprofits. I want to touch on what I think of as 7 underlying practices that support this work. That I think these practices I think of as both important for the individual, for relationships, for organizations, and how to be successful in taking what we're calling a mindfulness practice into the world. The first practice is to love the work, right? So it's not about some strategy. It's how can we really drop down into loving the work. And by the work, I mean the work of meditation, the work of mindfulness, the work of bringing compassion into the world. A second is to do the work, to actually have some kind of a practice. A third is that, and this might sound funny for the business world, but I think it's important for the business world, that this particular part of life isn't about becoming an expert. How can we keep our beginner's mind? The fourth is to see that we all have our own pain and the importance of feeling others' pain. So this is, I'm a little surprised that mindfulness practice has become as popular as it has, because if you're really practicing, you can't avoid difficulty, and you can't avoid the difficulty of others. But it's how do you enter that and hold that in a way where you can continue to be optimistic, continue to have a positive outlook. I love this Wendell Berry quote where he said, "Be joyful, though you've considered all the facts." The sixth practice is to depend on others. And this is such an important practice in the work world. And I think this is one of the key reasons why mindfulness has become so important and sought after in especially big tech companies, because they get that creativity, creating new products, better thinking all requires people being able to work together with more emotional intelligence. If you get 5 engineers in the room who aren't communicating well, not much is going to happen. But if they like each other, if they can communicate with each other, if they can have healthy conflict, they can make really important things happen. And this is the seventh practice, the seventh of these 7 practices, which in today's world may be one of the more difficult, is to keep making it simpler, right? We're not in this, I feel like I'm not, I have to laugh at myself. I wrote a book called Less, Accomplishing More by Doing Less, and I've come out as a failure. I'm failing at doing less. But it's my aspiration, and I really am looking for, making it simpler is partly a way of life. It's about being in this moment. This moment is pretty simple. Right now, if you check out your own life, you're okay. Right now, right here. You might notice your own breath. You might notice your own body. You can let go of all of the concerns of whatever's happening in your life just for this moment. And can you imagine how that and bringing that sensibility into organizations will only do good things, will only help support people's creativity and compassionate action. So it's all about freedom. How can we find more freedom? Freedom to meet this very moment. Freedom to be a full human being. Freedom to thrive. Let's do it together. Thank you.